Sit down, because we are going to enter one of the most intense and revealing moments of Jesus' life, a place where the sand and the wind tell stories of challenges and transformation. Have you ever contemplated the consequences of losing everything you know, leaving behind only yourself and your most profound thoughts? After the baptism in the waters of the Jordan, Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. It wasn't a casual ride, it was a test, a direct confrontation with human temptations. But why the desert? Why did he need to face solitude in such a hostile place? The answer begins to unravel when we realize that the desert is not just a geographical place, but a state of mind, a battlefield against the ego, against the narcissism that makes us believe that we are the center of the universe. Jesus there had no audience, no followers to impress. He was naked in his humanity, confronted with the same temptations we face daily, the desire for power, for recognition, for comfort. In this scenario, solitude is not a punishment but a gift. It serves as a platform for exposing the soul, dispelling masks, and revealing the truth. Jesus shows us that the real struggle is not against the outside world but against the illusions we have built about ourselves. The desert, then, becomes an antidote to narcissism, a place where we can learn to be humble, to listen to the voice that whispers beyond the noise of the ego. What if I told you that you too could find that desert within yourself? By facing solitude, you can discover not only who you are, but also who you can become. The central message here is that solitude, when embraced, can be the key to authentic transformation, a path to breaking free of the ego trap and connecting with something bigger than yourself. So as you consider Jesus' journey, think about how you can bring some of that wilderness into your life, not as a place of solitude, but as a sacred space for self-discovery and humility. And remember, in the vastness of the desert, the true greatness of a human being is found in the simplicity and stillness of his heart. Write in the comments, "Solitude is the path to true self-discovery." Share this message to reach more people. Subscribe to the channel to receive more inspiring reflections. When Jesus walked into the desert, he did not take with him multitudes or disciples, but only his soul and his temptations. Here, in the deafening silence of the desert, he found something more revealing than any sermon could be, a mirror of the soul. This mirror reflected our innermost motivations and deeper selves, not just our appearance. Imagine solitude as the moment when the world falls apart, leaving us with the nakedness of our inner truth. For Jesus, 40 days and nights of solitude meant facing not only physical hunger but also ego hunger, that insatiable desire to be seen, recognized, and worshipped. In the wilderness, he had to look at the temptations Satan offered him, power, wealth, fame, and decide what really defined him. It was not worldly greatness that he sought, but greatness of soul, the humility of being a servant, not a ruler. This act of looking within, of seeing oneself without the distractions of the world, is a challenge for any of us. Solitude in this context is not about loneliness, but about a clarity that only silence can bring. It invites us to see ourselves without pride, to realize that we are more than our successes or failures, and that our essence is in our authenticity when no one is looking. And what does solitude reveal? It reveals our virtues, those glimmers of light, that we often conceal beneath the layers of fear or doubt. But simultaneously, it also exposes our deepest temptations, those desires that seduce us away from who we truly are. In solitude, Jesus faced every temptation with the truth of its being and only the Word of God. This inner reflection shows us that solitude can be a powerful mirror for the soul. It is in silence that we find the unspoken answers, the unspoken truths. As we truly see ourselves, we are invited to choose humility, resist the ego, and live a life of inner peace and divine connection rather than for the world. So when you think of solitude, don't see it as an emptiness to be feared, but as a sacred space where the truth of our soul can finally be seen. And perhaps when you look into this mirror, you will discover that your greatest battles are fought not against the world, but against the illusions that you build yourself. In the heart of the desert, where the relentless sun and absolute loneliness are the only companions, Jesus faced the temptations that could corrupt any soul: power, wealth, and worship. These temptations were not your typical ones. They represented narcissism, promising recognition, admiration, and supremacy over all others. But what did Jesus do when faced with these tempting offers? The first temptation came with the promise of immediate satisfaction, turning stones into bread to satisfy hunger. But Jesus answered, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Here, he rejects the idea that his worth or satisfaction could come from something as transient as physical comfort, showing that true sustenance comes from obedience and faithfulness to a purpose greater than ego. Then the devil took him to the pinnacle of the temple, proposing that he cast himself down, for angels would sustain him, making him a spectacle to all. Jesus countered, "Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God." Adieu. This temptation was about the pursuit of fame and recognition, about being the center of attention. However, Jesus asserts that his mission was to serve and live by the divine will, not for human praise. Finally came the most seductive offer: all the kingdoms of the world in exchange for adoration of the tempter. The temptation was one of absolute power and worldly grandeur. And Jesus answers, "The Lord your God you shall worship, and he alone shall you serve." With this, he rejects the power corrupted by the ego, choosing humility over domination. Each of these answers reveals a lesson about how to deal with our own desires for greatness. Jesus teaches us that true power is gained by serving, true wealth by living a purposeful life, and true worship by giving to something greater than ourselves. Jesus' resistance to temptations in the wilderness teaches us to recognize and resist the appeals of narcissism that surround us. In a world that constantly offers us shortcuts to power, fame, and wealth, we follow Jesus' example in choosing humility, fidelity to our values, and the pursuit of a legacy that goes beyond personal greatness. As we reflect on Jesus' journey, we are invited to examine our own hearts, to reject the vanity of power, and to embrace a life that reflects not the glow of self, but the light of true greatness, that which is found in the simplicity of service and the purity of love. When Jesus chose the wilderness for his solitude, he wasn't just seeking a hiding place, he was seeking himself. The desert, with its vastness and silence, offers a setting where nothing can hide, where the masks we wear in society fall off, revealing who we really are. This solitude is a powerful instrument of self-knowledge, an essential way to combat narcissism that makes us seek external validation. Within this solitude, Jesus found a rare opportunity, that of seeing himself without the mirror of public opinion, without the applause or criticism that shapes our identities. He confronted his own motivations, desires, and crucially, the temptations that mirror human weaknesses. Here, he was not the known Messiah, but a man confronted with the truth of his humanity and divinity. Solitude disarms us from the need to be seen, loved, or validated by others. It forces us to deal with who we are when no one is looking. This is the first step in combating narcissism, which feeds on external worship and attention. In the desert, Jesus teaches that true greatness is recognized by one's integrity, not by the world. This journey of self-knowledge is not easy. It is a battle against the echoes of the ego, against the seduction of being the center of everything. But it is in stillness that we find the deepest answers about ourselves. It is where we realize that our essence is not in being loved or recognized, but in being true and who we were meant to be. With this self-knowledge, stillness becomes much more than a refuge to escape the world. It becomes a tool for spiritual growth. Solitude enables us to discern the most subtle inner voice, one that speaks of purpose, service, and selfless love. This is where we begin to understand that our worth lies not in the greatness that the world sees, but in the authenticity and humility of our heart. Allowing ourselves this solitude reveals that true self-esteem, based on self-knowledge rather than the approval of others, is immune to narcissism. It is a transformation that leads us to a life richer in meaning, where the search for self-knowledge becomes the search for a deeper connection with the divine and with humanity. Therefore, by considering solitude not as an emptiness to be avoided, but as a space to find ourselves, we can begin to deconstruct narcissism in our lives. And with that clarity, stillness is not just a place to rest, but a battleground for spiritual growth, where each of us can discover the true essence of our being. C.S. Lewis, one of the most influential Christian writers of the 20th century, often highlighted the importance of stillness for spiritual and moral growth. In his writings, he suggests that stillness is not merely an absence of noise or activity, but a state of being that allows for deep introspection and communion with the divine. This idea resonates powerfully with the biblical narrative of Jesus Christ, who, according to the Gospels, withdrew into the wilderness to pray and meditate, away from the demands of public life. Stillness, as Lewis suggests, offers a space where we can hear the inner voice that is often drowned out by the noise of the outside world. In silence, we are invited to confront our deepest truths, our fears, hopes, and the essence of our soul. This confrontation is crucial for spiritual growth, as it allows us to recognize and work with our imperfections, detaching ourselves from the ego that so often blinds us to spiritual realities. Jesus' experience in the wilderness is emblematic of this practice. He used these quiet moments not only to reaffirm his divine purpose, but also to strengthen his resistance against worldly temptations. Stillness, therefore, is not an act of escape, but of preparation and strengthening. It is in the wilderness, in solitude, that he found clarity and direction, something that can be applied to all of us in our quest for a fuller life aligned with spiritual values. Lewis argues that embracing stillness can lead to a deeper connection with the divine. This quiet space allows us to recognize that we are part of something bigger, that there is a reality beyond our ego and our immediate concerns. Stillness teaches us to listen, not only to ourselves, but to the movement of the Spirit, to the wisdom that transcends human knowledge. Therefore, stillness acts as a counterbalance to the superficiality and chaos of contemporary life. It invites us into a practice of self-reflection and contemplation that can be transformative. In a world where speed and noise are often glorified, stillness is a subversive practice that reminds us of the value of being present, listening, and being, rather than just doing or speaking. For Lewis, and for many who follow his line of thought, stillness is a path beyond the ego, a path that leads us to humility, gratitude, and communion with what is truly sacred. Finally, silence lets us hear the voice that calls us to be more and live by a higher truth. Solitude, as experienced by Jesus Christ, offers a powerful example of how connection with the divine can be deepened through isolation. The Gospels often describe Jesus retreating to solitary places to pray, demonstrating that even in the midst of his frenzied ministry, he deeply valued these quiet moments. These occasions of solitude were not just rest breaks, but vital encounters with God, where he sought guidance, strength, and a spiritual renewal. Jesus' solitude in the wilderness, in addition to being a period of trial, was an opportunity for pure communion with the Father. Here he resisted temptations not only through sheer willpower, but also through the power of his divine connection. This experience illustrates a crucial point. True satisfaction and strength come not from human recognition, but from a deep relationship with the divine. Jesus teaches that a person's worth is in their spirituality and relationship with God, not what they do or what others think. This practice of solitude was not only for Jesus' own benefit, it prepared him for a ministry of service. Solitude gave him the clarity needed to discern God's will, the strength to face the cross, and the compassion to serve others. He returned from these moments of solitude with a renewed mission and a deeper understanding of his divine purpose. This suggests to us that solitude is not a selfish act, but an act of preparation to give oneself more fully to service. For those who follow Christ's teachings, solitude offers a similar lesson. On our own spiritual journey, the practice of seeking out moments of solitude can prepare us for our own ministry, whatever it may be. In stillness, we can hear God's voice, discern our calling, and find the inner peace that empowers us to serve others with love and patience. Solitude reminds us that while we are called to be in the world, our strength and purpose come not from the world, but from something beyond it. Solitude, therefore, is vital for anyone who desires an effective and meaningful ministry. It reveals to us the importance of not being defined by applause or human criticism, but by our relationship with the divine. In a world that values constant activity and visibility, solitude offers us a necessary counterpoint, reminding us that true fulfillment and the ability to serve well come from a deep and ongoing connection with God. Solo time is not just a break from the world, but an exploration of our true selves and mission. A test of faith and moral strength, Jesus' wilderness experience in the Gospels is one of his most significant moments preparing him for his ministry. This period of solitude was not just a retreat from the world, it was an arena to face human temptations, and at the same time, a sacred space for communion with God, strengthening its resolve and clarifying its purpose. In the wilderness, Jesus was tempted in ways that touched the heart of the human condition, the desire for material comfort, the yearning for power, and the pursuit of personal glory. However, he resisted, showing that the path of service and humility is superior to self-aggrandizement. The desert served as a spiritual laboratory where Jesus, through solitude, learned to depend wholly on God's will, not on his own capabilities or human applause. This solitude was a preparation for a ministry characterized by service, healing, teaching, and sacrifice. Jesus came from the wilderness to serve others, starting with the poor and marginalized. Solitude, therefore, did not isolate him from the world. On the contrary, it prepared him to be in the world in a purer and more effective way. He showed that true greatness is found in selfless service, not in power or recognition. For followers of Jesus, this experience is a practical guide to the Christian life. Solitude, when intentional and focused on communion with God, prepares us to resist the seductions of the ego, self-sufficiency, the need to be seen and valued, and the desire for control. This time of solitude prepares us for a ministry of spreading God's grace and love. Preparation through solitude teaches us that the strength to serve comes from connecting with the divine, not from our human abilities. As we retreat into solitude, we are invited to reflect, pray, and listen, allowing our ego to dissolve before God's presence. This enables us to return to the world, not to seek our own glory, but to live and serve according to the divine will. Solitude, therefore, is not an end in itself, but a means to a greater end, a ministry of service marked by humility, compassion, and dedication to others. In a world that often exalts the ego, solitude reminds us that the true Christian vocation is to serve, shaping us to be more like Christ, who lived to glorify God and serve humanity. Jesus' temptation to turn stones into bread while he fasted in the wilderness is one of the most profound and revealing biblical narratives of ego resistance. This moment was not just about the physical need for food. It was a test of the soul, a proof of where Jesus placed his trust and what desires ruled his heart. Satan's proposal to turn stones into bread was, in essence, a temptation to satisfy an immediate, selfish desire, placing physical needs above spiritual ones and human will above divine. Jesus rejected this temptation with the words, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Matthew 4:4. This answer unveils a fundamental truth. Human life should not be reduced to mere consumption or the immediate satisfaction of the body's desires. Jesus was teaching that there is a deeper hunger, a spiritual hunger that can only be satisfied by fellowship with God, obedience to His Word, and pursuit of His kingdom. The famine in the desert, therefore, has a double meaning. Physically, Jesus was hungry after 40 days of fasting, but spiritually, he was being prepared for a ministry that would require a constant renunciation of himself in favor of the love of his neighbor and the will of God. This experience in the wilderness teaches us that true fulfillment comes not from the things of this world or from the immediate fulfillment of our desires, but from a deeper connection with the divine. By rejecting the temptation to satisfy one's hunger in a miraculous and selfish way, Jesus shows us the way to resist the seductions of the ego. He invites us to reflect on what stones we are trying to turn into bread in our own lives, whether they be the relentless pursuit of recognition, wealth, power, or immediate pleasures. He challenges us to seek something deeper, something that feeds the soul, to live not for itself, but for God's values and purposes. This lesson on hunger in the wilderness guides us toward more meaningful desires. The spiritual life is not about filling voids with temporary substitutes, but about cultivating a hunger for justice, peace, love, and truth, qualities that reflect God's character. Resistance to the seduction of the ego, therefore, opens us up to a life of meaning where true fulfillment is not found in what we can accumulate or achieve, but in what we can be and offer to others in the name of divine love. In short, Jesus' experience in the wilderness is a powerful reminder that true freedom and wholeness come from a heart aligned with God's desires, not the seductions of our ego. The narrative of Jesus' fasting during his time of solitude in the wilderness is rich in symbolism and teachings about human nature, especially regarding desire and the search for meaning. This hunger was not only physical, but also metaphorically represented a spiritual hunger for something deeper than narcissism or immediacy can offer. The desert, as a setting, amplifies this lesson, becoming a place where distractions dissipate and basic needs such as food stand out, forcing introspection about what really sustains the soul. The hunger Jesus experienced was an opportunity to confront and transcend selfish desires. When Satan tempted him to turn stones into bread, the choice was not just about satiating physical hunger, but about where he placed his trust and what values he prioritized. Jesus refused, stating that man shall not live by bread alone, Matthew 4:4, recognizing that true nourishment comes from God's Word, spiritual fellowship, and alignment with divine purposes. This response subverts the logic of narcissism, which seeks satisfaction in the ego, power, and immediate pleasure, showing that there is a nobler and more lasting desire. Deprivation, in its severity, acts as an effective teacher, revealing what truly matters. In the desert, far from the eyes and conveniences of society, Jesus discovered and reaffirmed his mission, which was not one of self-aggrandizement, but of service and sacrifice. This experience teaches us that solitude, combined with deprivation, can strip us of illusions about what really satisfies us, strengthening our moral resistance against the seductions of the world. Hunger thus becomes a metaphor for the hunger for meaning, for divine connection, which selfishness and materialism cannot fulfill. This solitude also invites us to reflect on our own desires and needs. How often do we seek to fill our spiritual hunger with temporary substitutes? The story of Jesus in the desert is a reminder that true satisfaction is not in hoarding or consuming, but in encountering the divine, in the search for justice, and in the practice of selfless love. Solitude confronts our yearning for purpose and teaches us that patience, humility, and faith are crucial for fulfilling this longing in a genuine and enduring manner. Therefore, hunger and desire in solitude play a crucial role in moral and spiritual formation. They show us what really sustains life, not the bread that perishes, but the word that lives forever, the love that serves, and the peace that surpasses all understanding. In the wilderness of our own solitude, we can learn to resist the ego by embracing a life that reflects the deepest and most meaningful values of God's kingdom. Solitude, as experienced by Jesus in the wilderness, was not just a retreat from the world, but a space where moral endurance was cultivated. This period of isolation was fundamental for him to face adversity with an integrity that the world rarely sees, without succumbing to the appeals of narcissism. By retreating into the wilderness, he demonstrated that solitude can be a powerful source of moral strength, preparing us to deal with temptations and challenges in ways that honor life's highest values. In the wilderness, Jesus faced 3 temptations that represent the most common forms of moral corruption: the search for immediate gratification, the lust for power, and the temptation for recognition. Each of these temptations could have led Jesus astray from his path of service and sacrifice, but solitude provided him with the clarity and strength he needed to resist. Being alone without his followers or community protection could have put him at risk. However, it was exactly in this solitude that he found his greatest strength. Solitude offered Jesus a space to reflect on his identity, mission, and the principles that would govern his life. Without the distractions of the world, he could hear God's voice clearly, reinforcing his resolve to follow the path of humility and love, not power or ego. This time of isolation was a crucible where his integrity was tested and strengthened, preparing him to face the adversities that would come with a firmness that could only be forged in solitude. Culture encourages the search for recognition, power, and immediate pleasure in our era, often exalting the ego. In this context, moral resistance, cultivated in solitude, becomes a rare and valuable treasure. Solitude teaches us to value introspection over exposure, humility over pride, and patience over haste. It allows us to confront our desires, fears, and ambitions without the pressure of being seen or judged by others. Solitude, therefore, is a subversive practice in a world that values constant visibility and self-assertion. As we withdraw into moments of solitude, we learn to depend less on external approval and more on our internal conviction and divine guidance. This detachment from the ego is essential to maintaining integrity. It enables us to make decisions based on moral and spiritual principles, rather than seeking applause or avoiding criticism. To us contemporaries, solitude may seem like a luxury or even an impossibility in an age of constant connectivity. However, this is exactly why it becomes so crucial. The practice of seeking moments of solitude, even if they are brief, can be an antidote to the ego culture's erosion of our morality. In solitude, we can reevaluate our priorities, confront our failures, and strengthen our resolve to live according to values that transcend the immediate. Solitude is not an end in itself, but a means to a greater end, the building of a life of integrity and service. Jesus demonstrated that by submitting to the wilderness of solitude, we can emerge with a moral resistance that allows us to truly live, love deeply, and serve without reservation. In a world where the ego is often the god to be served, solitude reminds us that there is a better, deeper, and more fulfilling path where true greatness is found in humility and integrity. Thus, when we seek solitude, we are not only retreating from the world, but also preparing to confront it with a strength that the world cannot provide or take away, but can only be nurtured through silence, reflection, and communion with the divine. Thank you. See you in the next video.